Hello and welcome to Political Brew. I'm Phil Hirschkorn. Our topics on today's show: Vice President Vance visits Maine, talking fraud and the U.S. House race in CD2. All 12 candidates for governor in the June primary on our debate stage. We'll break down some key moments. And the U.S. Senate race, Susan Collins versus Graham Plattner, talking energy prices. My guests are Emily Cain, a Democrat, former state legislator and Maine House Minority Leader, and Jason Levesque, a Republican and former mayor of Auburn. Thank you both for being here.
Glad to be back.
Vice President J.D. Vance touched down on Air Force Two this week for a rally at the Bangor airport. He promoted the Trump-Vance administration agenda, and U.S. House candidate and former Governor Paul LePage, the unopposed Republican, running for the 2nd congressional district seat being vacated by Democrat Jared Golden. But Vance's focus was fraud, specifically in federally funded, state-administered programs like MaineCare, our version of Medicaid.
Fraud isn't just about saving money. It's not just about protecting taxpayers, it's about protecting you. The money you send to the government and the services that you rely on. You've got an administration in Washington, D.C. that is fighting for you, fighting to protect your tax dollars, and fighting to put the fraudsters in prison.
Now, Maine's 2026 MaineCare budget is $4.7 billion, $1.7 billion in state funds, plus $3 billion in federal. The Trump administration alleges a number of Democratic-led states like Maine, Colorado, Illinois, and New York aren't policing programs well enough, whether that's vetting people enrolled or payments to providers. Vance speculated Maine could even be the bronze medalist for fraud after California and Minnesota, which are much more populous states with multiple millions more in proven fraud. I asked Vance, how could that be?
When you see certain types of fraud in certain types of programs, that's the tip of the iceberg.
Protesters, including Democratic candidates for Congress and governor, held forth outside the airport before Vance landed.
I believe Mainers deserve to know where every tax dollar is being spent, and that isn't partisan, that's just good government. And I've been saying it long before J.D. Vance booked a flight to Bangor.
If he wants to take on fraud, he should look in the mirror every day and start there. That exactly is what's going on in this country. The fraud is at the top of this administration, and they're the ones that are actually harming people across the state.
Jason, how did our Republican vice president do on his visit?
I think he did really well. I mean, he hit the high points that he needed to hit. I mean, the bronze medal statement, I think, was really telling. And you can't just look at a pure dollar amount. You do have to look at it proportionally. Of course, Minnesota and California are much bigger than Maine. But there is this, we know it. If you go on the street and you start talking to people, I knew it when I was mayor of Auburn. I mean, if you're doing anything at the municipal level and you got your feet on the ground, so to speak, you're going to see that there's fraud, waste, and abuse that's happening in the state. And I applaud everybody for attacking it, whether it be Democrats or Republicans. And I look at Secretary of State Matt Dunlap. He really called it out in his last state audit. No bid contracts. It's a leaky boat, so to speak. And, you know, whether it's a bronze medalist or we're fourth or runner-up, it doesn't really matter. The facts are that under Governor LePage, we had an investigatory unit that actually went after fraud and were quite successful. That same unit still exists under Governor Mills, but has been far less successful. You can't say that it's because less fraud is happening. You really have to look at the reasons why.
Emily?
I thought Governor Mills' response to this was pretty strong. She came out clearly and said, look, fraud is bad. We know how to deal with fraud. We partner with the government, federal government, when we have it. I agree that State Auditor Matt Dunlap has done a strong job in putting forward recommendations. But I also think we got to take a minute and talk about yesterday's spectacle. My husband saw Air Force Two. It was very cool to have it in Bangor. It's a very big and very beautiful plane. But also, this was a very big spectacle that was also very political, right? This was Paul LePage front and center. This is a nod to Susan Collins. This is about distracting from the fact that gas prices are going up. People are struggling with healthcare. People are struggling with the price of everything. And I think this was exactly what J.D. Vance is supposed to be doing right now, especially as somebody who wants to run for president in 2028. But ultimately, it was much more of a distraction from the bigger issues facing the Trump administration than a specific thing about Maine.
I think Emily's comment is a distraction from a distraction. I mean, you really can't say it's a distraction. We can't just focus on one thing all the time. Yes, we have extremely high gas prices. We know exactly why. Okay, we can't let Iran have a nuclear weapon, period, okay? It's a waiting game at this point with some elements of extreme violence on our end. he has a job to do. His job right now is to make sure Republicans maintain control of Congress so they can actually put forward more positive regulations and policies to get rid of fraud and abuse, to make sure that this government is running efficiently and cleanly, and to lower the cost for all Americans.
Ultimately, again, it comes back to you can't do something like this without a very political element. And I think we saw that on display, and probably we'll see more of it between now and November with a high-profile race in the 2nd District and the Senate race. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if the vice president comes back to Bangor and more than one time.
You know, part of my question was, yes, we have questionable $45 million in autism services overbilling. We have $1.7 million in questionable overbilling by a Somali immigrant-owned NGO. That's been out there for months. What else is there? We just don't know, right? It's a lot of speculation that the fraud is much, much worse. You agree with some of that speculation, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's speculation, but it's founded in proof. It's founded in, you know, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, usually it's a duck. So we have to go under that impression. I mean, we're dealing with massive amounts of money, minimal government oversight, no bid contracts, as members of your own party have even stated. That is just, it's an environment that's ready and willing for fraud and abuse to happen, and probably encourages it. And there's a long history of this. I'm not going to say one party is better than the other or rooting it out, but I would expect to see someone or people from both parties actually start calling out fraud in a big way as we get closer to the general election.
Emily, in her last 6 months in office, do you think Governor Mills could or should do even more to try to crack down on fraud and clean this up?
Well, you have to remember, Governor Mills was the Attorney General before. She was the Attorney General when Paul LePage was the governor, and before that. So I think we are talking about somebody who understands how complicated this is and how important it is to take it seriously. She has never not taken it seriously from the minute she took office as governor until the day, and we'll see that through from her in the next many months until next January. I have no doubt Janet is hard at work every day, as she always is. She's going to take this seriously, and that's why I thought her response to the vice president's visit, which was very focused on the issues at hand and actually not on the politics, was very in line with who she is and where her focus will continue to be.
Okay, we'll hear more from Vice President Vance at the end of the show. Right now, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, our Republican gubernatorial primary debate. This week, 207 anchor Rob Caldwell and I were pleased to host and moderate the last televised Maine Republican gubernatorial primary debate. All 7 candidates were on stage. Here are some highlights reported by our colleague, Christian Harza.
Bobby Charles, like many on that stage, wants to cut spending and taxes, dismayed by the direction of the state's budget.
It's reckless. It has crashed this economy.
Cutting income and property taxes were both on the table. Some called for a widespread defunding of the Department of Health and Human Services. Owen McCarthy proposed a more measured approach to help Mainers on welfare.
So if they work a little more, they can get 80% of the benefits, 60% of the benefits. Step off of that, it's a win-win.
A state report shows Maine is 80,000 homes short of what it needs. Real estate developer David Jones says he is the man to build them, and he'd start with less regulations.
Those regulations, they add about between $80,000 and $120,000 per single family home. That's insane.
To aid and attract businesses, Jonathan Bush wants to show executives Maine's finest.
You meet them at the end of the jetway and you wrap them up and you take them on a tour. And when they get back on that plane, there is a contract in their hand.
On the topic of energy, somewhat breaking rank from his Republican colleagues, Ben Midgley was more sympathetic to the green economy.
I'm fine with renewables as long as they don't do it on the backs of Maine ratepayers. You've got $200 million a year that we're paying in stranded costs for this connection.
Garrett Mason stood out, calling for tempered expectations and rhetoric, given the possibility for split state control.
I'm going to fight for a Republican legislature every single day. But even if we don't, we have to have somebody with the experience to go through and navigate that and get it done anyway.
7 of your party's candidates, 90 minutes, a lot of ground was covered. Your impressions?
Yeah, first of all, I looked at this debate and I really kind of prepped myself to be, okay, I don't know any of these people. I want a clean and fresh approach. I did that with the Democrat debate, too, the following night. And I thought for sure there'd be a clear front runner coming out of this debate. What I found is that each one of the candidates actually gained ground or stood the same. I think the big winners here were Ben Midgley and Owen McCarthy and Jonathan Bush.
Why?
Why? Owen McCarthy is arguably one of the smartest people in the room. He needs a little bit more, I think, what's the word? Experience, understanding.
He's only 38.
30, a little bit more, and I want to say this very carefully, governmental experience, so he can actually take what's in his brain and actually apply it in real world scenarios. Huge future. He might get the nomination. Definitely one of the smartest people in the room. Ben Midgley, tempered, controlled, smart, analytic. You can't knock his backstory. This guy's done it. He's been there. That resonated with me.
CEO of a couple of national gym companies.
Never graduated college. Just did it the hard way, really. He didn't do it the easy way. And then without a doubt, Jonathan Bush, if you want to fix healthcare, it's Jonathan Bush. He will fix healthcare because he's done it in the past. He understands it.
His companies
have. He understands that like no candidate on either side. This debate, unfortunately, for me personally, made the decision a bit harder. I wish I was Dr. Frankenstein. I could cut them all up and put them together and have a super candidate. There is no one that really went down, in my opinion. So either everybody went up a little bit, some more than others.
So Jason likes the CEO outsiders. What were your impressions?
I will say for me, I'm going to make a little bit of a joke here, but it was 7 red ties and endless red flags for me. Sorry, I couldn't resist. But here's what I will say is that I think there was not a lot of distinguishing themselves that night. There was a lot of we agree on things, and I'll also be honest.
We
there
tried.
was a lot of bad math in that debate too.
As
you've heard me say on this program, I don't do math in public. They should all stop. They were millions and billions, and really, I will say, got to give credit to Garrett Mason, who was the one who grounded that math back in reality of balanced budgets and having to work across the aisle. I also completely agree about Owen McCarthy. I've actually known Owen since he was an undergraduate at the University of Maine. He's always been that smart, and I love that he's in this race. I have no idea who's going to win. I have less of an idea after watching that debate, but I think if you're somebody who's just starting to tune in, I agree that you left especially impressed with Owen, with Ben, with Garrett, and probably a little sort of curious more than anything about John Bush, particularly because he's been on TV so much.
So Mason pointed out, even in the good old LePage years when he was Senate leader.
He was talking about me.
Yeah.
I was the minority leader that worked on that budget.
So the famous income taxes, when there was a Republican trifecta, was like a 1.5% or so income tax cut. Others are talking about zeroing out the income tax cut, and that was part of the debate. What was realistic?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at that, in math is dangerous, right? Math can cut both ways. It can. So you have to look at someone who understands what needs to happen, and it's universal. And this is where the distinction between the Republican field and the Democrat field really became glaring. They understand that in order to attract business, we do have to control our tax rates here in Maine. We have to have a significant pathway forward to reducing tax burden for every Mainer, not just corporations, not just those in poverty. So they agree to that. Now, how do they get there? And that's the interesting part. If you look at Garrett Mason's approach about working with the legislature, making small incremental gains and lowering taxes, versus Bobby Charles, who wants to get rid of it all in 4 years, and then you got Owen McCarthy, who's like, it's an 8-year process. Okay. Now, we understand that needs to happen. There's different ways. I personally, as a Republican who's balanced budgets at the municipal level, look at it going, yeah, I think there's a combination of Midgley and Owen McCarthy's kind of process in this. It's going to take incremental change over the next 4 to 6 years. You just can't pull the Band-Aid off.
Just briefly, did you hear enough about spending cuts to counterbalance their proposed tax cuts?
No, I didn't, but they weren't trying to do that, right? That wasn't the point. They can't get that detailed in this debate. What I think is most interesting to me coming off this is I have no idea who's coming out to vote, right? If there's a bunch of Trump sort of MAGA-aligned people coming out to vote, you get one result out of this election. If it's a bunch of more independently minded, more traditional, pragmatic, moderate Republicans, you get a different result. And I haven't heard anybody even share polling data on what this electorate's going to look like, and I think it's going to be fascinating because the only thing that people really are coming to vote on is this race. There's no other. The congressional first district primary is not going to be a draw.
Right. So we should remind our viewers, independents can vote in either primary, and early voting is actually underway. We're going to take another break, and when we come back, our Democratic gubernatorial primary debate. This week, 207 anchor Rob Caldwell and I were also pleased to host and moderate the last televised Democratic gubernatorial primary debate. Here are some highlights reported by our colleague Christian Harza.
All 5 candidates want to make improvements to Maine's programs, primarily paid through tax increases.
Those who can pay more should pay more.
The recently approved millionaire's tax was a crowd favorite.
And I would double the millionaire's tax from what the legislature already has done. I think 4% is a much fairer way.
Angus King III and Nirav Shah said they support increasing the lodging tax, but stopped short of endorsing more sales or meals taxes.
Both of those also place additional burden on Maine people who are going out to eat or just buying things.
One tax the candidates don't like, property taxes. They propose increasing the state's homestead exemption, currently $25,000. Some want to do even more, higher taxes for the second homes of out-of-staters.
It would require us to open up our state constitution. But as I travel the state of Maine, I talk to Republicans and Democrats and independents who are frustrated.
Over the course of the debate, the candidates proposed spending hundreds of millions on state programs, such as Medicare and housing. Universal child care specifically, Shanna Bellows said, would cost $400 million.
We're already spending some of these costs on health care and child care in other ways. And we're seeing it in the fact that young people are not staying in our state.
King, conversely, didn't offer up large spending plans.
I'm trying to be as careful as I can be, not making financial promises during this campaign, because I think we're all going to have to tighten our belts in the future, given the cuts that are coming from the feds.
Pingree's treasurer. Yeah. What's your impression of the debate?
I mean, I thought last night you saw a great display of people who know what they're talking about when it comes to the state of Maine. You did see them get somewhat specific, but you also saw them come back to their values every time. I thought there was a lot of similarity on that stage, and the distinction was sort of in approach, right? You definitely saw Angus King take the truly more moderate approach. You saw Hannah with the more detailed, more nuanced policy approach. Troy, who always comes in strong with the working person perspective on all of it. Shanna, very big picture, very broad policy. And Dr. Shaw coming in with his own take on sort of plays on each of the others. So I thought it was very friendly. It was very substantive. And again, I thought we saw a lot of strong values. And I think we see that the case these Democrats are making is one about affordability. And the difference as we head into the June primary is who do you think can win in November, which you don't cover in your highlights, but did come up a little bit in the debate as they were articulating what kind of team they could bring together to head into the November election.
Jason?
Yeah, I heard a lot about tax more. Their substance that they talked about was how and what can we tax more of? Okay, should we just tax tourists? Oh, let's just tax tourists during Memorial Day to Labor Day or Columbus Day. How about increasing this tax or doubling this tax? Not once did I hear anybody talk about spending cuts. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they just want more. So you're right. In that way, they were very similar, except you saw kind of a bifurcation of the Democrat Party up here. What you saw really was, someone told me I can't say communist or socialist on air anymore, so I'm not, but I came up with a new term. It's called Dino, Democrat in name only. And you see these people that aren't true historical Democrats, and then you see Angus King III and Nirav Shah. They're more pragmatic, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I was actually intrigued with what both of them had to say. They weren't going to commit too much. They didn't like talking about increasing in taxes. Angus King actually talked about regulatory reform with regards to early child care. Spot on. It costs too much money to open up a child care facility. We keep adding more regulations, which drives the industry into the gray zone, unregulated gray zone. And they didn't really talk... All of them, actually. The best question that you asked both the Democrats and Republicans was, okay, you have a company that's looking at New Hampshire or Maine. Why are they going to come to Maine? How are you going to convince them? Maine people are better than New Hampshire people, I think Troy Jackson said, and it was echoed by a few others. Well, come on. I know a lot of New Hampshire people, and they're pretty good workers. They're good, strong individuals, but they have a massive corporate advantage, a massive individual advantage to working in New Hampshire. There are a lot of people...
Because there's no income tax?
No income tax. They just got rid of corporate cap gains tax last year. Who gets rid of a tax in New England? New Hampshire does.
So, Emily, is this going to emerge as a resume contest, a personality contest, given that the policy differences are not so strong?
I think the nuance that I appreciate what Jason was saying about the difference of the two non-former elected officials versus the three who have been elected officials.
Part of the problem versus part of the outside solution.
And I would say part of the absolute solution and path to victory here is not only can you win, but what can you do? And I will say, I will highlight, I think, Hannah did it the most often, but each of the three who have been elected officials, Troy and Shanna and Hannah, each offered some specific examples of being nuanced with policy, how you actually have to move things forward. I mean, Hannah's comeback on the meals and lodging tax with the example of the ferry, I thought was really strong. She's saying, look, I live in one of those places that tourists come. They do change the rates during the time of year. She made it specific and made it an example of how this plays out on the ground for Maine people. And I think that was also what distinguished people last night. Who was talking in big picture, sort of round platitudes, and who was getting down to the experience of Maine people, the affordability challenges that they're facing. And what I think is important to know, because we haven't said his name yet in this section, is Donald Trump, right? What we didn't hear as much last night was sort of who's going to be the biggest Trump fighter. I think they're all making that case, and they have to. But what we saw last night was people saying, they all referenced him at some point, but here's how I'm going to actually do this for the state of Maine. I was very proud as a Democrat who's going to vote in the Democratic primary last night to see these candidates on display.
You know, Phil, a couple things. I just got to say, okay, the Trump fighting thing, great. Trump's going to be president for 2 more years. What are you going to do after that?
No, that's my point.
Here's
I
your
agree
substance.
with you. Yeah.
Here's your substantive point. This is what they all proposed. We need to study this more. We need to form a blue ribbon commission. We really need to analyze the problem. I'm sorry. The problem was up on stage.
Well, only one person proposed a study.
They all talked about analyzing, taking time. But no, hold on. They are the problem. I think Mainers understand that. If they're up there spending half their time defending policies that have gotten us into this economic malaise, they actually need to provide the solutions. Time for study is done. We know what the solutions are. They can't provide it.
Okay, we'll have to.
It was a lot of great specifics, and it was a great night.
And we want to remind our viewers they can watch both debates online or on our streaming app as we go into our final break. When we come back, the U.S. Senate race, Graham Plattner's energy challenge to Susan Collins. This week, Democratic U.S. Senate candidate Graham Plattner cast his primary ballot and talked about his proposed energy plan. The oyster farmer and his wife Amy were first in line in Sullivan on day 1 of early voting. Afterward, Plattner discussed his plan to freeze national electricity rates, impose a windfall profits tax on big oil, and develop more domestic renewable power.
We need to fund clean energy projects instead of military spending and foreign war. There is no better use of American dollars to protect our national security than creating a robust energy system that makes us self-sustaining.
With the price of gas inflated by the Iran war from $3 to $4.50 a gallon, Plattner advocates suspending the 18-cent a gallon federal gasoline tax. Incumbent Republican Senator Susan Collins pounced on that idea. Her campaign spokesman noting the gas tax revenue funds 85% of the Federal Highway Trust Fund that pays for road and bridge construction and maintenance, saying this shows how little he understands the job he's applying for. Collins herself emphasized decreasing our reliance on the most expensive imported natural gas by connecting Maine to a pipeline to more domestic sources.
We have the highest dependence in the country on home heating oil for our homes. Natural gas is cleaner, it's cheaper, and it should be more available in our state.
Already 43% of our electricity generation. A Washington Post editorial labeled Plattner's energy plan a fantasy, long on anger and short on real solutions. And this is what Vice President Vance said about Collins at his Bangor rally.
Sometimes I get frustrated with Susan Collins. I almost wish that she was more partisan. But the thing I love about Susan is she is independent because Maine is an independent state. And frankly, if she was as partisan as I sometimes wish that she was, she would not be a good fit for the people of Maine.
Well, even as a Democrat, you got to admit the vice president has a point there.
Well, I'm going to talk about two things. So that was a gift to Susan Collins from the vice president. It should have had a bow on it. Here you go. Susan Collins, we want you to win. Thanks so much.
But it's truthful.
I'm not saying it's not true, but it was a gift because you don't hear that coming from the president. So it was a big deal for him to say that. But I want to go back to Graham Plattner because what that showed me, Graham Plattner is now officially going to be the nominee. He is looking past June. He's voted, but his focus is no longer on June. It's no longer on distinguishing himself between him and other Democrats. It's 100% on the fall. So this energy plan he rolled out was really his first foray into the policy side of things. Now, he can't do policy without politics because he's a candidate for office and he's not an elected official. So we saw him trying to draw a distinction. This is not going to be the first time. I'm not on the inside of that campaign, but I think this is going to be a theme for him. And this is a new approach as he shifts into general election mode between now and November. It's going to be a long haul. So I think we're going to see a lot of this as he seeks to paint himself as somebody who understands what's going on and has actual ideas. Whether you think they're good or not is going to be up for discussion, to draw a contrast with him and the senator to begin to make the case that you could see him as an elected official in office.
Jason?
It's really hard. I mean, when you're running for U.S. Senate, to have this steep of a learning curve, we need someone that's actually experienced, tempered, and has a firm grasp of the situation. This is not a training ground to become a United States Senator. You can't learn this in 6 months between now and the general. It is, I think, the Washington Post, and I don't agree with the Washington Post often, but they really hit it on the head at this point. It is fantasy land. There are some very smart things that we can do at the federal level to help. The biggest one is making sure the Strait of Hormuz is never held hostage again by a totalitarian regime. That's what we have to do. We have to get through this hard part in order to get to something that actually provides consistent and stable supply for generations to come.
I mean, what we're seeing here, though, like, it's so interesting. I think this is I like to talk about campaign tactics, right, and approaches in this kind of thing. So this is a new tactic for him. We're talking about policy, and here we are talking about whether his ideas are good ideas or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
To me, this is a smart tactic for him to keep himself in the news in a time when it's still primary season, but he doesn't have a primary to worry about.
He also has put out plans for health care reform,
Yes.
chiefly Medicare for all, the Bernie Sanders idea. He's put out a defend democracy agenda.
But this is the first one he rolled out after he is now the presumptive
Since Janet
nominee.
Mills dropped out.
Because I think before that, he was doing it, but it was not the front and center part of his race. Because the front and center part of his race was winning the primary. That's done now. You know, he's going to win the primary. That's a fait accompli. But it's what happens. He's teeing himself up for this marathon between now and November of making the case against
Yeah,
politics.
I mean, hey, listen, he needs to be rolling out these policy initiatives, no matter how half-baked they are. I think the more he does this, the more it's going to actually educate the Maine electorate to see that he's not ready for this job. He's not ready for the big leagues. He does not have what it takes, and he won't have what it takes. He could practice between now and November. He's not going to have what it takes to become a United States Senator for the country, for Maine. So, great, let him speak, let him talk. I mean, we're all going to look at it, and we're all going to draw a conclusion, kind of opposite to my conclusion after the Republican debate, where I thought it elevated the entire field. This is just going to really just bring him down even further. So the more he talks, the better it is for Senator Collins.
So I think this is where we're going to talk about this a lot over the coming months. This is going to be a refrain from me, so you might get bored, is that this is all about what are people feeling in November. If gas prices are $6 and $7 a gallon going into November, then I think the senator has a very hard time getting reelected, and Graham Plattner has a wider lane. But he has to keep the focus on Trump and on putting a check on the Trump administration in its final 2 years.
A senator has a 6-year term. Trump's going to be there for 2. How about the other 4?
In this moment, it's going to be what is most pressing on voters' minds. Is what's pressing on most voters' minds how to put a check in the power in the Senate, or is it going to be what's beyond that? And this is the battle we're going to continue to hear both candidates fight over the.
So I don't think I have a little bit more faith in the Maine electorate. I don't think they're so short-sighted that they're going to elect a 6-year senator, a junior senator from the state of Maine, who's so far left, he redefines left, just because of Trump's 2 years left in office. That's short-sighted.
Oh, I agree. I love Maine voters.
Short-sighted.
I think Maine voters are actually some of the smartest in the nation. We see that, how often they split their tickets. They're extremely thoughtful. But I think from a national environment perspective, this race will not be immune from the national environment in a way we've never seen before.
To be continued. That's all for this edition of Political Brew. Thanks to my guests, Emily Cain and Jason Levesque. And thank you for watching.